All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2026 Housing Inventory Count Survey Training. My name is Alexander Fuller. Just a couple housekeeping things before we get started today. Everyone is currently on mute. I strongly encourage everyone to use the questions function of GoToWebinar to ask questions throughout the presentation. This is going to be a pretty long presentation, so I'm not quite sure if we'll have a lot of time at the end to answer questions. So if you ask them during the presentation, it'll just be a little bit easier for me to answer them. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded. The slides and the webinar will be available in our help desk article for the housing inventory count. I'll also send out a link when that's available. But again, any questions, please ask during the presentation. I'll try to answer them then. Okay, so what's on the agenda today is that we're going to go through the summary and the purpose of the count. We're going to go through projects that are included, the timeline and the submission process, a couple of helpful tips for completing the survey. We're going to go through all of the survey sections, 1 through 9, and then we'll provide some resources. And then if there's time, we can answer any remaining questions. Okay, so for the purpose of the housing inventory count, the housing inventory count is a one-night inventory count of projects within the COC that provides beds and units dedicated to serving persons who are homeless. It is intended to provide HUD and the COC with information about the shelter and housing capacity of the homeless crisis response system. It should reflect the number of beds and units available for occupancy on the night of the point in time count. So for this year's housing inventory count, the date that you should keep in mind is going to be January 22nd, 2026. This is the date that we had the point in time count this year. And this is also the date in which the information that you're putting into the survey should reflect. So when you're completing the survey, you're going to be completing it as if you're completing it on January 22nd, 2026. And again, for the purpose, it contributes to the accuracy of the LSA. So all HUD reports flow into each other and are compared against each other. The housing inventory count, point in time count report are the first set of reports for the year that are reported to HUD. And at the end of the year, in November, whatever we report in the housing inventory count coming up is going to be reflected in that report, and it's going to be compared against what the numbers look like at that time. Also, the housing inventory count surveys also help us update inventories in the system. So to help ensure that your bed and unit inventory that's tied to your project is accurate. And, that helps with coordinated entry, ensuring that, the beds that you have available are seen by coordinated entry so you can receive referrals. And then also it'll help with ensuring that your utilization is accurate. So if your housing clients and your bed and unit inventory is incorrect, then your utilization is going to be incorrect also. So this also helps with just keeping those things in line. Okay, so who needs to submit a HIC survey? So for the housing inventory count, a project with dedicated beds, units, is one where the primary intent for the project is to serve homeless persons. The project verifies homeless status as part of the eligibility determination, and the actual project clients are predominantly homeless, or for permanent housing where clients were homeless at entry. So what this means is that it's going to be any project that has a bed inventory, essentially. So if your project has a bed inventory, you are going to be required to participate in the HIC. So those project types would include emergency shelter, both entry and exit, as well as night by night, transitional housing, safe haven, and permanent housing, which under permanent housing, it includes permanent supportive housing, rapid housing, and then other permanent housing. So if you've ever seen OPH, what that refers to are two project types. Is going to be permanent housing, housing with services, no disability, and then permanent housing, housing only. So both of those project types fall under other permanent housing. So if you ever see that anywhere else, that's what it's referring to. So these are the project types that are going to be required to participate in the housing inventory count. One thing to note is that No matter if the project is HMIS participating or non-participating, or if they're funded through HUD or funded through other sources, they are still going to be required to participate and complete a survey. So what that means is that if you serve a DV project that enters information into like iCarol or um, InfoNet, then you're going to complete a housing inventory count survey on your project as well, just because we need to capture that information about your project because it's not included in HMIS. And again, funding sources really don't play a part into who needs to participate. So if you're HUD funded, you're going to participate. If you're DFSS funded, you're still going to participate. If you're not funded by anybody and you're just relying on donations to operate, then you're still going to complete a survey. So there's really no exclusions of who participate as long as you're one of the project types that we discussed. So emergency shelter, transitional housing, safe haven, and any permanent housing project that falls under that. Are there any questions about who needs to submit a survey? Okay, so for the timeline and the submission process, so today, February 9th, the housing inventory count survey did open. So you are able to click the link and access the survey. I do recommend everybody to review our help desk documentation prior to trying to complete the survey, just so you're making sure that you're aware of everything to expect prior to you kind of diving in. February 16th, which is next Monday, we will send out another email just reminding providers that they have a week left to complete the surveys. And then on February 20th, the surveys will close. So try to have everything in prior to the 20th, but the 20th is going to be the last day for submission. So the way that the submission process works is that you are going to be completing a survey for individual projects within your agency. So if you have 5 projects at your agency that needs to submit a survey, you're going to be completing 5 separate surveys for each, or 5 surveys in total, but 1 survey for each project. All surveys must be completed in Alchemer. So that's the link that you're going to complete the survey to is in Alchemer. So that's the only way to complete it. We do offer a PDF version of the survey, but it's not intended to be submitted, but more of a reference point for you to have the information prior to completing the survey. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. One thing that we do have is a housing inventory count reference table. So this link here is going to provide you with all the projects we believe should participate in the housing inventory count. A couple of things about the reference table. So the reference table is going to include all the projects as well as basic information about the project that you could use to help complete your survey. Again, the reference table information is based on information we currently have in HMIS. So don't use it as the source of truth when completing the survey, but it should be used as a reference point to understand if information should change or if something doesn't look accurate. You'll be able to update that in the survey. One thing also about the reference table, again, it includes all the projects we believe should participate in the count. But what that means is that there could be projects that are listed on the reference table that are no longer operational at your agency. In those cases, those projects do not have to complete a survey, but we do ask that you let us know and complete a deactivation form for those projects just so that they don't show up again in any other processes. So right now, if this shows up on that list, then that means that that project isn't deactivated, closed out in HMIS appropriately. So we ask that you submit a form, the deactivation form. You can find it on the help desk, so we can close that project out. In turn, if you have a project at your agency you believe should be included, but you don't see it on the reference table, it's really important that you reach out to us to let us know that so that we can add that particular project to the survey so you'll be able to complete it. So without letting us know, you won't be able to complete surveys on projects that are not referenced in the reference table. So again, if you have a project at your agency, let's say an emergency shelter project, and it's not listed on the reference table and it's operational and you think that it should be included, let us know so we can include it in the survey so that you can complete a survey for it. And again, all projects, no matter if it's participating, non-participating, must submit a survey by 11:59 on Friday, the 20th. One thing to note about this, I do have 11:59 here for Friday because that's the end of day for Friday. But typically, right now, the survey is set to close at 1 a.m. on Saturday the 20th or the 21st. So you have an additional hour to get some last minute things in. But I strongly recommend not waiting to the last minute to start your survey, start the surveys. But you do have an extra hour into Saturday to get last minute things in. Okay, we do have a question. We have a combined project, triage, rapid housing. Will combined projects require two surveys? So I'm assuming you're referring to like joint THRH projects. And in that case, if you do have a joint THRH project, you are going to complete two separate surveys. There is a question in the survey that references joint THRH, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the coming slides, but you will be completing two separate surveys. Okay, so some helpful tips just to know about the survey prior to you getting started is that ideally it'll probably be best for you to capture all the information needed to complete the survey prior to you starting it. Again, we do offer a PDF version on the help desk. The ideal for this PDF version is not to be submitted, but more of a tool that providers can use to capture all of the information that they're going to need to complete the survey. So instead of opening the survey and then realizing that you don't have the information or all the information to complete it and having to come back to it, you could utilize this PDF to capture all the information from the various sources that you'll get information from, document it on this PDF version. So when you go into the survey to complete it, you have all the information to just complete it all in one single session, and you don't have to save and continue. If you do run into a situation where you do have to come back to the survey, there is a link at the very top that you'll be able to click that says save and continue later. When you do that, it's going to provide another pop-up window that asks for your email address and for you to verify that email address. When you put in your email address, it's going to email you a link to your survey, so you'll be able to pick up where you left off. It's really important that you put in an accurate email address into the save and continue later. So let's say you put in the email address and you misspelled something in it. You're not going to receive the link to be able to go back and complete the survey. And you're either going to have to reach out to us and we might be able to get you back exactly where you left off, but more than likely you will have to start that survey over again. So it's really important to make sure that you're putting in your email address accurately if you're intending to come back to the survey. Okay, so we have another question. Does income and employment have to complete this survey? So income and employment projects, from my understanding, the project types for those are services only projects. So in that case, services only projects aren't required to complete a HIC survey and aren't involved in the HIC process. So in that case, they wouldn't need to complete a survey. Okay, we have a really good question. I just looked at the chart and one of our programs are listed twice. Should that be sent in as a help desk ticket? Okay, this is a really good question, and I probably should have been a little bit more clear about the article. So the article lists all of the projects that we anticipate participating in an account. The list that you see will have duplicate rows for your project. The reason for that is that it is reflecting the bid inventory counts. So if you have a project that has two separate bid inventory counts, for example, a count or bid inventory for singles and a bid inventory for families, you're going to have two unique rows. One at the very end of that row that shows the bid utilization for your single inventory, and then a bid utilization for your family inventory. This reference really comes into play when you're completing the unit and bed inventory section on the survey, just so you can have the unique perspective of each different bed type that's available and what it currently states. Okay, we have another question. Where do we access the link? So the link can be found in these help desk slides. So once we send the slides out, you'll have the link. The email that we sent out this morning includes the link. And if you go to our help desk article uh, referring to the 2026 housing inventory count, the overview, you'll be able to find a link there as well. Okay. For clarity, if I have a Rapid housing project, emergency shelter, permanent supportive housing project, all at different sites, all would need a HIC survey. Yes. So as long as these projects are under your agency, you will have to complete a survey, no matter where they're located. In the survey, it is going to ask for site addresses in some instances. So that's where you'll be able to kind of make that distinction to say that some projects are on site at our main location, and then other projects might be at a different address. So you would be able to document that in the survey, but a survey is going to be required for all of those projects. Very good questions. Okay, so this is just going to be an overview of all the sections in the survey that you're going to have to complete. Um, Again, you're going to use the reference table just as a point of reference to understand what's currently in the system. It still might be accurate, and you might be able to use that same information that's found in the reference table. But again, if any information is incorrect, this survey is where you're going to be able to update that information and put the accurate information. The first section is going to be project information. And it's just basically going to capture, basic information about your project. Section 2 is going to be inventory and development. So these are going to be bid inventory that wasn't available the night of the count. Section 3 is going to be just verifying the project type. Section 4 is going to be target population. So if your project serves a special population, you'll be able to document that there. Sections 5 and 6 is really going to get into your actual inventory the night of the point in time count. So the number of units and the number of bids that were available at the night of the count. Section 7 is only going to be for emergency shelter projects. So in Section 3, if you selected emergency shelter as the project type, Section 7 will populate for you. If you select any other project type other than emergency shelter, you will never see Section 7. Section 8 is going to verify HMIS participation. So if you're a project that participates in HMIS, this section will pretty much be straightforward. If you don't participate in HMIS, you'll document the reason why. If you are HMIS participating, but some of your bids aren't participating in HMIS, then we'll kind of want that understanding as well in that section. Section 9 is going to be for non-participating projects. So in Section 8, if you indicated that your project is HMIS participating and all of your bids participate in HMIS, Section 9 will not populate for you, and the end of your survey will be Section 8. If you do indicate that your project is non-participating or some of your bids are not participating, then you will have to complete Section 9 to capture the capacity of the project on the night of the count. Okay, and if you have any questions about like your specific project, just immediately just create a help desk ticket, and then I could try to help sort out any concerns or any questions about specific projects. Okay, so once you start your survey and once you click on the link to start the survey, you're going to be presented with a overview of the process similar to what we discussed in the previous slides. And then at the very bottom of that page is where it's going to ask for a username and password. So to start a survey, you are going to have to put in a username and the password. The username and the password is going to reflect the HMIS ID number of the project that you're intending to complete the survey for. So for example, if I'm going in to complete a survey from an All Chicago Emergency Shelter project, and the ID number for that project is 883, then the username and the password that I'm going to put in is 883. Doing that is going to allow the survey to populate, or not to populate, but to go to the next screen so that you can then complete the questions for this particular project. Again, one thing to note is that if you click on the survey and you put in your project ID number for the username and the password, and it does not let you continue, what that means is that this project is not included on the reference table. And that just means that we're unaware that this project should be included. So you're going to reach out to us so then we can add that project into the survey so that you'll be able to then put that ID number in to complete it. But again, if you put in your ID number and it doesn't allow you to go to the next screen, you're going to need to reach out to us so that we can add that ID number to the surveys. It's really important because if we're missing any projects, then we'll be missing that data on the overall HIC submission. So it's really important if you identify a project at your agency that we haven't identified that you think should be counted, reach out to us. Even if you aren't 100% sure, just let us know, and then we can kind of we can work together to determine if they should be included or not. But it's really important to let us know so that you can complete a survey for that project. Okay, so section one, project information. So the main part is going to be the contact information. Prior to you seeing contact information, there is going to be two questions above this. One is going to ask for the project ID number again, and then the second is going to ask for the project name. So in my example, I will put 883 for the project ID number, and then for the project name, I will put All Chicago Emergency Shelter. So those two questions are really just validation to make sure that when we look at it, that the survey that you're completing matches the ID number that it was intended to be completed for. So the ID numbers would match 883, and then the project ID and the project that you manually put in would also reflect project 883. So once you do that, then you'll be able to see the contact information question right underneath it. The contact information question is really important because this is the information we'll use if we need to get in contact with someone about anything that was submitted on the survey. So if we had concerns about the utilization that was added, this is the person we're going to reach out to. If the person that's completing the survey is not the person that should be reached out to for questions, that person, we ask that you put them as the second contact person, just because when we reach out, we'll reach out to both email address, and then that'll allow that person to, answer any questions. The primary contact person is going to be the person that receives the confirmation email. So once you complete the survey, the confirmation will go to the email address of the main contact person. So again, it's really important that you're putting in your email address accurately, because if you put it in incorrectly, you're not going to receive that confirmation. So yeah, again, just make sure everything you're putting in here is accurate because this is the information we'll use to follow up about the surveys. Okay, also in section 1, is then going to ask about the operating start date of the project. So if you know your operating start date, you'll put that in. Again, the reference table that we have available does have the operating start dates that we currently have for your projects in HMIS. So if those operating start dates are incorrect, you can put in the correct start date into the survey, and then we'll update it in HMIS appropriately. One thing to note about the operating start date is that this is the date in which your project started serving clients and not necessarily started serving clients in HMIS. So if you have a project that started serving clients in HMIS, let's say October 1st of 2025, but your project started operating back in July serving clients and you were just doing it internally, keeping the documentation, your operating start date will be July and not October. So it's going to be the date in which your project first started serving clients and not necessarily the date in which you started documenting client activity in HMIS. Those can be two separate dates, but the date for the operating start date is the date that your project officially started serving clients in general. Okay, the next question is going to refer to the housing type of the project. So again, all the projects that are required for the housing inventory count are housing type projects. So which means that they have bed count. So emergency shelter projects, they have a bed list. Permanent supportive housing, all of these projects have bed lists. So you're just going to identify the type of housing that project provides, whether it's site-based single site, site-based clustered multiple sites, tenant-based, or if the project serves DV. So for an example, if you have an emergency shelter project and all of your clients are at one shelter and you're serving them at that one location, you'll select site-based single site, and then you'll just provide an address in the text box underneath it with the address of your of that location, whether it's the main address of your facility or the main address of your agency, you'll put that there. For things such as clustered multiple sites, it would be, let's say, a transitional housing project that might have two locations where they're serving clients, but it's all under one project. In this case, you'll provide the address as well as the zip codes for those two locations. Tenant-based scattered site would be more so wrappery housing, permanent supportive housing. So if you're housing clients in multiple areas, you don't need to include the address of every place that you've housed a client, but we do ask that you put in the zip codes of the areas in which clients have been housed in your project. And again, if your project serves DV, you'll select the DV option and then you'll only provide zip codes. So we don't need addresses for DV projects. We just need the zip codes in which clients are being served. Whether that's at one location, you'll put in one zip code. If it's a permanent supportive housing, wrappery housing project, you'll put in multiple zip codes. Are there any questions about the housing type or anything that we've talked about so far? Okay, I do see your hand raised, but if you could just ask your question in the questions function, then I can try to answer it. Okay, so while we wait on the question to come in, I am going to move over just to the next part of the project information section. So the next piece is going to be the funding source. So in previous surveys, if you're familiar, the funding source typically was a conditional kind of question. So depending on what you selected, it allowed you to choose additional funding. So previously, if you selected, let's say VA, it then populated the VA funding sources. This year, we made the funding source section a little bit more easier to navigate or a little bit easier to understand. The functionality still works the same, but there's no more conditional logic. So when you go into the funding source section, you're going to see a list of all the available funding sources that a project could have. So what you're going to do is that you're going to select any funding sources that apply to your project. So if your project is funded through permanent supportive housing, HUD COC, you'll select that. And then in the text box, you'll provide the grant ID number or the award ID number for that particular funding. The list that's provided in the survey is pretty long, so read through all of them. At the very end, there are two options for other, or there's one option for other, which allows you to put in a funding source that's not listed above. And then there's an option that your project doesn't receive any funding at all. So this particular question requires an answer, so you can't leave it completely blank. So you have to make some selection. So if your project doesn't receive funding, you are able to select that. And then if your project receives multiple funding sources, you're able to select all of the funding sources that are applicable. But again, we do ask that you put in the grant ID number for those for that funding. So if you're funded through HUD, so whether that's HUD COC, HUD ESG, VA, PATH, RI, any federal funding, you should have a grant ID number that was given to you with the award letter of this funding. If you're funded through DFSS, the DFSS provides a identification number, is usually like 6 digits. That's the number that you're going to put in for the funding. If there's any other funding sources, IDHS, things like that, those should also have award ID numbers, and you're going to want to put those in as well. So the grant ID numbers are really important because that's what ties your project to the funding that HUD provided, essentially. So when we submit the housing inventory count report, the grant ID numbers help, link the project to what HUD expects it to be, essentially. So if those numbers are inaccurate or they don't reflect what HUD thinks they should be for your project, then that could potentially cause some issues. So just make sure that you're putting those things in accurately. Okay, so we do have a couple questions. So for clarification, tenant-based scatter sites can have zip codes, not the complete address. Yeah, so for tenant-based, typically, you'll have quite a few addresses if you're housing quite a few clients. So we're not asking for all of the addresses, but we are asking for the zip codes of those locations. So if you have 5 clients that are housed in 5 separate zip codes, we're asking for all 5 of those to be documented in that section. So it's one text box. So you'll put in one zip code. You can just put a comma, space, put in the next zip code, comma, space. Just make sure you're putting them all in so we have a complete understanding of the clients that you're serving. So the next question, how many zip codes do we need to include for scattered site wrapper housing? So again, the zip code should reflect the housing that you're providing the client. So if you house the client in various zip codes, those zip codes should be reflected. Okay, where do I find the operation date? So the first thing I would do is I would look at our reference table and see what operation date that we have in the system for your project already. If your project's been in existence for some time now, so if your project has been in existence for some time, the operational start date that we have reflected has been, in the system for quite a bit. So it could be accurate. But if it's not, then you're going to reflect that in the survey. Another place to find the operation date might be your grant, to find out the day that the grant was provided, and then from there you might be able to kind of figure out when your agency actually started operating that particular project. So again, the operating start date is not going to reflect the date that you started entering clients into HMIS, with the date that the project started operating and serving clients in general. So if you had to wait maybe like a couple of weeks before your HMIS ID number became available, you're not going to include that gap in your operational date. You're still going to reflect the date that you started serving clients. Okay, can we use the main office address for scatter sites programs and include multiple zip codes? Yes. So if you want to include the main office address, then that's fine, but then you're still going to want to include the zip codes in which you're serving those clients. But yes, you can still include the main office address as well. Okay, so the scatter site, since the units are citywide, wouldn't the agency address work best? So ideally, the city or the agency address is needed for submission. But the most important part of this, especially for those things, is understanding where clients are being served. So we still do ask for the zip code just because those are HUD requirements of things that need to be included with your with the submission. So the agency address still can be added to that section, but the zip codes of where clients are being served is ideally the information that we do need for this particular section. Okay, so inventories and development. So inventories and development is really referring to or beds and units that weren't available on the night of the count. So if you have, so let me just give you an example. So if you have a bed inventory, let's say 20 clients, and you reported 20 clients in the last housing inventory count in 2025, your inventory increased or decreased to, let's say, 30 beds prior to January 22nd, that inventory is going to be considered current. So if you have all of your beds available at the time of the count, then that's going to be your current inventory. If you're not expecting any more beds to come online after the point in time count, then this section you're going to actually skip. So if your beds are current, you're not expecting anything else, this section you'll just select no for, and then you'll just keep going. This section is intended for projects that might have not fully, where all of the bids might have not fully come online come to point in time count. So an example would be if I have a project that's funded for 50 bids. So you're expected to have 50 bids for your project. At the night of the count, you only had 30 bids available. So you didn't have all of the bids that you plan to have available. So 20 bids are left. Those 20 bids are going to be the 20 bids that you're going to reflect in your under development inventory section. So if we go to the next slide here, you can see what the table looks like. So again, if you don't have any bids that fall into this, you'll select no, it'll move you on to the next question. But if you do select yes, that you have bids that weren't captured or weren't available the night of the count, then it's going to populate the question below. So within this question, you're only going to document the in development inventory. So in the example, if I'm funded for 50 bids, 30 bids were available the night of the count, we're not going to include that 30 in the number that we're going to put here. We're only going to include the 20. So we're only going to put 20 bids that are still under development. So these bids weren't available for the night of the count, but they are going to come online in 2026 at some point. It does ask for a unit number also. So this is where you're going to have to determine how those bids are going to be captured. Either they're going to be captured as family units or they're going to be captured as singles. So if I'm capturing all of those 20 bids as singles, I'm going to put 20 bids and I'm going to put 20 units because the bids and the units have to be 1-to-1 for them to reflect as single inventories. If I'm reflecting a household or housing or household family bids, then my unit inventory is going to be less than 50% or less than my bed count. So if I'm intending to serve two family households, so households with two household members in it, then my overall bed count would still be 20 beds because I still have those 20 beds, but my units, instead of it being 20, is going to be 10. So it's going to reflect the individual household. So 10 households, 20 beds, two clients per household. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on how to complete the in development? Okay, so we do have a question. Some of our projects are going to be consolidated down into one grant. Should that be reflected in the inventory and development on the project that the other projects will be consolidated into? So this is a really good question. If your projects were not consolidated as of January 22nd, 2026, you're going to complete the surveys as if the consolidation isn't on the table at all. You're going to complete them as if they're just single projects with whatever the inventory for those individual projects were on that date. If you're intending to consolidate in the future, um, you're not going to reflect that in these surveys. Okay, so the next piece is going to be section 3, which is going to look at project types. So project types are all based on the most recent 2026 data standards. So we have emergency shelter, night by night, entry and exit, transitional housing, safe haven, and then the permanent housing projects that are included as well. So you're only going to select one of these. These should reflect one-to-one with what you're funded are funding to serve. So if you're funded for an emergency shelter project, you're going to select emergency shelter. If you're funded for permanent supportive housing, you're going to select that. And that should coincide one-to-one with your award letter, your grant award letter. For projects that are funded to DFSS. So those projects are typically given a DFSS model and not necessarily a HUD project type. Um, In most cases, DFSS, I think, does a good job of providing you with what your project type is going to be. But if not, my plan is that I am going to put together a crosswalk between DFSS program models to the project types that will be available on the reference article. It should be available by tomorrow. When I send out an email about the slides, I'll include that in there so that if you're funded to DFSS, you can at least see what the crosswalk looks like. Because there is a crosswalk. You just can't like randomly pick a project type. Um, so we'll make sure that that's available as well. If you are a DFSS project that's been in the system since the last housing inventory count, if you look at the reference table, that project type is the project type that you should select. So any projects prior to, um, let's say August of 2025 have all been verified with DFSS to ensure that the project type that's reflected in the system now are the accurate project types. So if you have an older DFSS project, you can rely on the reference table. If it's a newer DFSS project, then you can rely on the crosswalk that will be available tomorrow. And again, one thing to note about this is that depending on what you select for the project type section is going to dictate additional questions that you're going to see in the survey. So for permanent supportive housing, if you select that, you are going to be provided with the chronic homelessness dedicated beds question. If you're emergency shelter, you're going to be provided with the emergency shelter section that talks about the bed capacities. Okay, so section 4 is going to talk to target population. So projects can indicate a target population if they meet the following two criteria. So the project intends to serve the specific population, and at least 75% of the clients served by that project fits that target group descriptor. So if your project is serving a specific population or a special population, one, the project has to the intent of that project is to serve that population exclusively. and that at least 75% of the clients that are served in that project fit that target population. Only one target population can be selected per project. If a project does not serve a target population, then you'll just indicate not applicable. Okay, so quick question. If a project is closing in June, should I report on availability or zero if we are not taking intakes any longer? Okay, so the survey is really intended for what happened on the night of the count. So if your project is intending to close in June, but you did serve clients on the night of the count, you're going to complete this survey as if you're not closing. You're not closing. So you're going to reflect the bed and units that were available as of that day. So you're not going to reflect anything future. So any future plans to close the project, any future bid allocations, anything like that. The only future things that you're going to account for is bids that might not have come online yet, and that's going to be in the bid inventory that's not available as of the night of the count. So that particular section is where you'll document that. But everywhere else, you're going to complete this survey based on what was accurate the night of January 22nd. Okay, so this is what the actual question looks like on the survey. So again, you'll be able to select DV if you're a DV project, HIV if you're serving HOPL clients, and then non-applicable if your project doesn't serve any special population. If you do choose DV, then it is going to populate an additional question, just asking for context on what comparable database you do enter information in. So in most cases, it's going to be InfoNet or it's going to be iCarol. But if there's anything else, you'll select other and then you'll write that in of what that comparable database is. Okay, so the next section is section 5, the units. Um, so units should be viewed as the count of households that can be served. If the project is serving single clients, then the unit and bed inventory must be 1-to-1. If units are unavailable for a particular household, you're going to put 0, and it should add it should all add up to whatever the total that you're putting into question 9. So the way that you're going to fill this out is that you're going to identify the units for your project. And it is really helpful if you use the PDF version first and you complete this on there, just because you're going to want to be able to look at the units and the beds at one time to make sure that it all makes sense together. But for the units section, you're going to put in the total units that are going to be available for your clients. So let's say you have 20 total units. And the next question is going to ask how many units are dedicated to families. And let's say I only have 10 units dedicated to families. And I have 10 units dedicated to singles and no units dedicated to minors. At that point, question 10 and 11 will add up to question 9, because question 9, we're documenting the total is 20. Question 10, we're documenting 10 family units. Question 11, we're documenting 11 or 10 single units. So all of those things add up. The next slide, we'll talk about beds, but we're going to want to make sure that everything still aligns appropriately. So since we selected 10 units for families and 10 units for singles, when we look at our bed inventory, we're going to make sure that, again, singles must be 1-to-1. So if we have 10 units, then we're going to have 10 beds because they're 1-to-1. When it comes to families, those are not going to be 1-to-1. If we have 10 units, then that means that the count for units has to be double that. It has to at least be 20 beds or higher if you're serving more than 2 clients in a particular household. So again, households cannot be 1-to-1. You cannot have 10 units for families and 10 units for, or 10 beds for families. The beds have to be double the unit count at least. So keeping in the same example for beds, since we had 20 total beds, let's just say we have 30 total, or we have 20 total units. Let's say we have total 30 beds, which means that again, our family beds cannot be 1-to-1. So if we had 10 units for families, then that means we need to have at least 20 beds for those units for it to make sense. For question 17, we'll put 10 beds because singles can be 1-to-1 with the unit count. So for the total beds, we'll have 30 beds. If you add 16 and 17 up, 20 family, 20 singles, you'll have that total of 30 beds. So again, these numbers have to make sense together. And if there are any discrepancies, this is what we'll really reach out for, just to kind of confirm what the actual bed and unit counts are. Okay, so question. So for families, we're counting the number of people in each household. So that's the way that you should think about beds versus units. So units are reflecting the actual count of households that can be served, and beds are reflecting the actual individual clients. So an example that you can use to kind of understand what that looks like is that if you run the data quality report in Business Objects, you'll be provided with a group ID number as well as the individual client ID number. The count of unique group ID numbers would be the total, households that are being served, where the individual client ID numbers are going to be the individual clients, the beds that are going to be reflected. That's an example to kind of to see what that looks like visually, but I don't encourage you to use the data quality report to complete this, because then your bid and unit inventory will be incorrect. But if you just want a way to visually see like the difference between like households and individual clients in the system, that would be a good way to kind of go about that. Okay, so the next part is going to be section 6 for dedicated bids. So bids funded by HUD or other federal partner dedicated to the list populated below must be reported as dedicated bids. So these categories are going to be chronic homelessness, veterans, and youth. So if your project has dedicated bids to any of these, you're going to want to document that in that section. So chronic homelessness is going to be the number of beds that are dedicated to housing persons experiencing chronic homelessness and their household members. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that if the head of household is chronic homeless, but the additional household members aren't, then they all get bundled together as chronic homelessness because of the head of household. When it comes to veterans, the number of beds dedicated to housing veterans experiencing homelessness and their household members. And then youth, the number of beds that are dedicated to youth-led households, persons up to the age of 24. So anyone under the age of 24 that's the head of household would fall under a youth dedicated bed. So if we look at what the survey reflects, it's going to show single and family beds. It's not going to show child only beds, just because child only beds don't have bed dedications. One thing that I don't know if I mentioned is that the chronic homeless dedication is only for permanent supportive housing projects. If you're not a permanent supportive housing project, it's not going to even show this chronic dedicated bed section for you. When it comes to youth and veteran beds, you are going to be able to put those in where applicable. So again, these things must align with what you've already selected for the bed and unit inventory in the previous sections. So if I indicated that I had 10 single beds all together for singles, then of that, how many are dedicated to these various populations? So youth, veterans, or chronic homelessness. If it's all the beds, you're going to put the entire 10 in the text box to represent that all of the beds that you're identifying fall under this bed dedication. If it's a subset of that, then you're going to put whatever that number is. So if it's 5 bids that are dedicated to, for example, youth, you'll put 5. And what that means is, and what we'll see on our end is that 5 bids are dedicated to youth and 5 bids have no bid dedication to it. So anything that's not reflected in the bid dedication will be automatically assumed as not having a bid dedication. Okay, so the next section is going to be section 7, which is only going to be applicable to emergency shelter projects. So again, if you selected emergency shelter as the project type in the previous sections, this section is going to populate for you. If you selected anything else, you're not going to see this section. So what this section is intended is to capture any differences that happened with your project and to kind of understand why it happened and also what the current bid inventory should be set as. So if your bids changed throughout the year or throughout 2025, so if they change from being year-round bids to seasonal bids, you're going to select yes if that's applicable. If they haven't, you'll select no. If they changed from all family bids to single bids, you're going to want to indicate that there. So let's say in 2025, during the last housing inventory count, your entire bid inventory was dedicated to singles. But this year, when you're completing the survey, you're dedicating all of your bids to family bids. Then you're going to select yes to this, and then at the very end, it's going to present a text box where you'll be able to explain why that occurred. And then, did you have any overflow bids, or did the overflow bids for your projects change in 2025? So if you have any bids that are overflow, or if you acquired any overflow bids since 2025, you'll select yes to that as well. So would the emergency shelter dedicated bids fall under chronic homelessness if they don't specify veteran or youth? No. So if you don't specify veteran or youth, then they'll fall under non-dedicated. They wouldn't fall under anything else. Okay, so once you complete those questions, if you select yes to any of them, then you'll be presented with these additional text box. So again, you'll indicate the year-round bids that are available for your project as well as the seasonal bids. So if those change, you'll put in what the current year-round bid total is and the seasonal bids. So if you're completing the entire the utilization section, so the unit and the bid inventory, and you select 10 bids and 10 of those or 5 of those are going to be year round and the other 5 are going to be seasonal, you'll indicate that in this section as well. And then also if you're the type of bid change, so if it went from being a facility based to a voucher or any other type of bid, then you'll indicate that there. The bed type changing is really unlikely. Emergency shelters usually stay at facility base, but if there is a reason for that to change, then you have a spot to indicate that. Okay, so the next section is going to be HMIS participation. So this is where you're going to be able to identify if your project participates in HMIS or if all of the bids participate in HMIS. So if all of your bids are HMIS participating, you'll select yes, and that'll be the end of this section. If a portion of the bids participate, we do ask that you put in what portion of those bids are participating. So if you select 10 single bids, but only 5 of them are participating and the other 5 are not, you'll indicate 5 as being their participating bids. If your HMIS is participating and none of your bids are participating in HMIS, you are going to be asked to fill out the text box in the next question because we really want to understand why that is. And if you serve a DV project, then you'll just select DV for that. So selecting DV in the previous question is going to populate this last section, which is going to be the night of January 22nd. So this section is intended to capture all the information that we would typically capture from HMIS on your project. So the number of clients that were housed or served as of January 22nd. So if you're a permanent supportive housing project, that's going to be clients that were housed as of that date. If your emergency shelter project is going to be clients served, the clients that were checked in on the night of the point in time count. And then underneath it is going to be an additional question asking for the households. So if you have 10 clients and all 10 clients are single, you're going to put 10 for the clients and the household account. If you serve a 5 families with 2 household members in each one, you're going to select 5 for the household count and then 10 again for the clients. So you're just capturing the information that we would be able to capture from your HMIS data. But since this is for non-participating projects that don't enter data into HMIS, this is how we'll capture that information for the count. So if you're non-participating, it's really important that you complete this accurately, because this is the information that we will report on your project. Okay, so that's the entire survey. I do have some resources to go over. We are over time a little bit. If anybody does have to leave, thank you again for joining the webinar. But I will stay on for a bit to kind of go through the rest of the slides and then answer any remaining questions. So the resources that we do have available, we do have our housing inventory count articles. The overview article is just giving you a full overview of the submission process, the timelines, and pretty much why the housing inventory count is important. The housing inventory count workflow is going to be the article that walks step by step of how to complete the survey. So similar to what we just did about going through the questions, that article is going to do the same thing and kind of walk through the entire survey for you. The reference table is, again, a good starting point to understand what we already know about your project, which you can use as a reference point to complete questions on the survey. But then also, this is a great way to identify projects that are supposed to be participating. Again, if you go to complete a survey and it doesn't allow you, or it doesn't accept the ID number that you put in, or if you look at the reference table and it's missing a project you believe should be included, you are going to reach out to us so that we can add that project into the survey so that you could complete it. One thing is that we are offering office hours from February 10th through the 20th. You can click on the link. We have various times available for you to select. Times do go pretty fast, so if you're anticipating having any issues, my recommendation is to, get your time selected already. But we are going to offer office hours, so like if you have questions about the survey, if you have unique situations about your project that you want to talk through, we'll have time to do that as well. And again, any questions about any of this, you can always reach out to the help desk and we'll try to assist as best as possible. So just really quick to kind of re-go over the timeline is that today opens up the surveys for everyone. So if you click on the link, you will be able to complete the survey or at least start on it. We will send out an email on Monday, next Monday, just to let providers know that there's 1 week left until the due date. On the 20th, surveys will close. Again, 1 survey submission per individual project at your agency must be completed. They all must be completed using Alchemer. So the survey link that you have. Any PDF submissions will not be accepted. So if you complete it on the PDF and you submit it to myself or the help desk or anybody else on the team, it's not going to be counted. So you're going to have to do it again. And again, no matter if your HMI is participating, non-participating, funded through HUD, funded through local donations, anything like that, you're still going to participate as long as your project type is a emergency shelter, transitional housing, safe haven, or falls within the permanent housing bucket. So PSH, RRH, permanent housing without disabilities, and then permanent housing only. So as long as your project falls into one of those, no matter anything else, you're still going to participate. Okay. So again, thank you everyone for joining. I am going to stay on and answer as many questions as possible. This webinar is going to be or has been recorded, and the slides will be available on our help desk article. More than likely tomorrow, I will send out an email letting everyone know when that's available. Uh, in that, I will also include the updated DFSS crosswalk between the project type and the DFSS models as well. So again, I'll stay on to answer any additional questions, but for everyone else, thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, so we do have a question. Does the ATA complete the survey or shelter staff? So the emails and everything has been going out to ATAs just because that's our point of contact to agencies. But the surveys aren't specifically for ATA. So if there's other people at your agency that's more fitting to complete the survey, or if they're operating that particular project and they're probably best to complete it, then that's perfectly fine also. So anyone can complete the survey. But we do ask that the information is accurate, is based on actual documentation that you have available about your project. But anyone can complete it. Okay, where would I find a link to sign up for office hours? So the office hours link should be available in the email that went out this morning to ATAs. I will include that the office hours link in our help desk article, the overview article. So if you check back, let's say in an hour or two, it should be there as well. And then also when we send out the slides and the link to the webinar recording tomorrow, I'll make sure that that's included in that as well. Okay, so I'll stay online for maybe about a minute or two left. So any additional questions, again, please feel free to ask them. If anything comes up after the webinar, always feel free to reach out to the help desk and we'll be able to answer those questions. If there's anything specific about your project that you want to talk about, um, you can reach out to the help desk and we'll try to answer them. But if it's a pretty in-depth question. My recommendation is just to schedule office hours. That way we'll be able to kind of talk through it thoroughly um, and not kind of go back and forth via email. Okay, it looks like nothing else is coming in. So again, I thank everyone for joining the webinar today. Again, this is going to be recorded. We will send out the slides and the link to the recording. Again, any questions, reach out to the help desk and thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.